Welcome back. If you've joined me from part one, if you've joined me for the first time, I suggest you watch part one before watching part two. This is the tree that I've modelled over the course of these two videos. If you like the tree in front of you and you want to model a tree like the one you see in front of you, please stay with me. So the first job I'm going to do here is add some texture to this smooth armature that I've sprayed with primer. Now, material I'm going to use for this job is something called Artex. That's easily available in the UK. If you can't get Artex, there's other products that do a similar job. I like to add a bit of Indian ink to my mixture so it's slightly tinted. So here I've added some to my Artex along with water, mixed up to a paste, so it's got a grey colour to it. Once you've mixed up your paste, you can now start applying it to your armature. So just going to dab it on here so it coats the whole armature. As you can see now, it's starting to smooth out, and that's because the Artex has started to dry. When that starts to happen, you can go over the whole thing with a damp, soft paintbrush like this one here. Make sure you don't leave any Artex on those wires, the small wires, because we're going to be putting heat shrink tubing on them. Just go over the whole thing now with the brush, smooth it over. So I'm happy with that. Texture looks okay.
Before I start to paint my main armature, I just want to show you some of the tools I've got here for the job. I've got a set of sable brushes here. You don't need an expensive paintbrush for this particular job. I've had these lying around, well, I've had these for years. Probably end up using one of these for the job. Alternatively, you can get a cheap setup like this, for example. Cost me a couple of quid, bought them in a hobby craft store. They'd be quite suitable for the job as well. Now, obviously, you're going to need paints for the job. I like to use Tamiya colours XF62 and XF55. I'm going to be using for this particular armature. If you wonder what the XF stands for, it just means it dries a dead flat colour, which is really important when you're doing things like modelling trees, for example. Now, thinners, you've got a choice how you're going to thin these. You can buy the Tamiya thinners if you're using Tamiya colours. They are quite expensive. They come in slightly larger bottles than these, but I find a cheaper alternative is to buy some isopropyl alcohol. Does the same job. In fact, the Tamiya thinners are just isopropyl alcohol with distilled water added to it. An eyedropper for dispensing the isopropyl alcohol, and obviously a paint dish like this for mixing your colours. I put a small amount of the green in this bowl here. Now I'm going to add some of my grey to this bowl here. That should be enough. Just going to mix a bit of green with it. And what I'm doing is almost dry brushing it on to the ends of these branches here. So what I want is, I want the base colour I've got on there to sort of show through slightly. So this base colour I've got on the tree is also going to be use to give the tree, the final tree, its final colour. Now this Tamiya colour does dry quite quickly. It's a good idea every now and again to give your brush a clean, because as I said, it dries very quickly. And because we've only put the two colours we're using on the tree into this isopropanol that I'm using to clean my brushes, we don't need to use clean isopropanol when we need to add some more to these colours here. I've got a little too much green there, so I'm just going to dab the grey over that. But as you can see, the green is still slightly showing through, which is fine. So as you can see, we haven't got one flat colour on that. We've got a nice mixture of the grey and the green. But make sure the grey is more dominant than the green. So when you've finished painting your main armature, you're happy with the colour, the next step is to add that growing ivy. That's if you want to add growing ivy to your tree, of course. This is a tree I modelled a while ago. You can see I've got some growing ivy growing up the main trunk here, also growing up some of the smaller branches, and that's a piece of the plumber's hemp that acts as the stem. Now, this plumber's hemp, believe it or not, derived from the cannabis plant, is ideal for this job. It's the right colour, not very expensive to buy, and it tends to come in a bundle like this. I mean, this will last me an actual lifetime. I won't need to order any more of this. And what I use to stick the plumber's hemp to the armature with is PVA glue. I'm going to be using one of my cheap brushes for this job. I don't want to use one of my more expensive brushes if I'm using PVA glue. When it comes to leaves, the ivy leaves tend to be quite a dark green. I'm using this company here called Country Scenes. I'm not sure if they've got a website. If they have, I'll put a link to it. You don't want to be using the same leaves you've used for the sea foam, because it might look a bit odd. So I'm going to get on now, crack on and start adding the ivy to my main armature. Now before I stick my plumber's hemp to my main armature, I'm going to get the ivy leaves prepared. What I like to do sometimes is grade my material. So I've got a small kitchen sieve here. So what I'm going to do is put enough in the sieve that I think is going to be enough to cover the tree. Give it a good shake. And as you can see, this very fine stuff now is coming through. And I don't really want to have that fine stuff sticking to my plumber's hemp, so that's why I'm getting rid of it. Okay, I think I've got enough there to do the tree with. So what you do then is just pour this back into your tub, like so. And now those ivy leaves are ready to go on the plumber's hemp once you've stuck your plumber's hemp onto your main armature. Now you want to tease out this hemp, so you've got a sort of a strand like this. The actual lengths of this hemp are quite short, and so what you have to do is you have to tease them out and they'll stick together. Now this I think is a bit too concentrated for my armature, so I'm going to tease out some more. Say something like that. Now what you're going to do is, you'll find with this plumber's hemp there are some thick pieces that you want to remove. Okay, so something like that. Start twisting it. If it looks a bit concentrating in one place, just tease it out. Then just start twisting this. As you can see, all the short lengths are still sticking together. bunched up here. Give that a twirl. Okay, I'm happy with that now. So what I'll do is I'll just trim the pieces I need, then stick them to the main armature. Okay, I've got my first strand now ready to go on the armature. If I need more, I can always tease some more out of the plumber's hemp. This next job can be a bit tricky sometimes. If you've got a pair of these are visors, I would wear them because it will probably make the job a lot easier. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using the same glue I used for attaching my leaves to my seafoam. Decide where on your armature you're going to have the growing ivy. That's if you do decide to have ivy on your tree. And just paint a trail of PVA glue down the armature where you're going to be attaching your plumber's hemp to. So what I've got here is got my PVA glue mixed to glue the ivy leaves to my plumber's hemp. It's a similar mixture to what I use for attaching the leaves to my seafoam. I've added a bit of fairy liquid to it to break up the surface tension. So what I'm going to do, so wherever that glue is going to go is where your ivy leaves are going to stick to. So get your clean piece of paper, get your ivy leaves, and just going to add a bit more ivy down here. Okay. Before we add our seafoam to our armature here, there's a bit of preparation work involved with the seafoam. This seafoam I've added to an armature quite a while ago. Tree needs finishing. So seafoam is quite easily available. Places like eBay, you can buy it. A company called Gauge Master set it in a box, and you can get quite a lot of trees out of a box of Gauge Master seafoam. Now a lot of modelers will use this, they'll take it out of the box, if there's any leaves on it, they'll take the leaves off. Once they've done that, they'll spray the tree with a wood colour to their liking, put spray adhesive on it, and then add the leaves to it. And it doesn't look too bad on a layout, but the trouble with that method is that you can't have the variety of trees that you'd like by using doing it that way, because if you had 20 of these on a layout, they're all going to look the same, they're all more or less the same shape, and I didn't want that with my trees. I like to do a variety of different types of trees. So what I tend to do is I'll take one of these and I'll trim off the little branches from my main armature. Just be careful. Okay, so I end up with a load of small branches that I've trimmed off from the main armature. Now if you notice, all these will have little black seeds sticking to the branches. I like to take them off, so you end up with something like this, which I think looks far better than a branch that's got all these black seeds on them. And the way I get them off is, these are a pair of plastic throwaway surgical tweezers. I just squeeze the seeds with your pliers, and they'll just fall off quite easily. Try and not break any branches if you can. I mean, invariably you will break maybe one or two, but that's not too disastrous if you do. As you can see, they're coming off quite easily. You just need to basically squeeze them. And when you think you've got enough, say like I've done here, when you think you've done enough for your main armature, The next step is to then coat them with some PVA glue. The reason why I like to use PVA glue on my seafoam is because I think it adds a bit of strength to the seafoam once the PVA glue has dried on it. And I use a mixture of 50-50, 50% PVA glue and 50% water. So it's sort of more or less the consistency of single cream. And I use these. These are brilliant. They're called photo clip holders. Again, Amazon, eBay. They're not very expensive now. You can buy them without the mounts, or you can buy them with just the wire and the clip. I prefer to buy them with the mounts because then you can have all your branches ready for spraying, ready for dipping, besides your glue, and as you see, they won't fall over. So take the first one, dip it in your PVA glue. All right, let's take it out now. Now you'll see there that the surface tension is still there, hasn't gone away completely. Obviously you don't want it dry looking like that, so what I tend to do is I'll put it in an empty jar, just about fits in, give it a good twist. Some of them will come off. Now you can take your darning needle, the one you were using to make holes in your heat shrink tubing, and just get rid of that piece. Okay, give it a bang. There you go. Oops. A few more there. Okay, and just hang it up. Now this device I made, as you can see, is just a piece of plain wood. Top, it's got various a length of cuts in it, and the end, and it's held up by two ends of the same size wood that I've used for doing the cuts in. Very easy to make. If you don't want to make one of these, you can probably get away with just leaving it on, just taking it off your crocodile clip and just leaving it on a piece of paper like that. So once you've done all those and the PVA glue is dried, the next step is to spray them. Once you've prepped all your seafoam branches by de-seeding them and coating them with the PVA glue, the next step is to give them a coat of paint. I'm sticking with emulsion paint. I know it sounds a bit unconventional using household paints. These tend to be lying around my house for absolutely ages, and as you can see from the from the colour on the top of this one. If you are going to use a household paint through an airbrush, do bear in mind that they do tend to clog up airbrushes more so than say acrylics or enamels. That's because the consistency has to be slightly thicker. So that's why I'm using my cheap Humbrol airbrush here. They're about £16 to buy. They're easy to clean, more so than say your more expensive airbrush like this Iwata here. Now I could put it through my Iwata airbrush, but I don't really want to because it's a really nice airbrush, and it would involve quite a bit of cleaning up afterwards. More so than say putting it once I put it through this airbrush here. So that's why I'm using a cheap airbrush for this job. Also, it's a simple airbrush job. You don't need a fancy airbrush. You can use the cheapest airbrush possible for this type of job. If you don't want to use household paints, there's other options. You can buy acrylics or enamels to put through an airbrush, or you can buy, even easier, you can buy the spray cans. For example, Tamiya do a really nice range of colours. The wargaming shops do nice spray paints as well. But if you do use a spray paint, just make sure that it's got a matte finish to it. You don't want shiny branches on your tree. Another thing is, once you've do bear in mind that once you've sprayed your seafoam branch with the colour you've chosen, and you've attached it to your tree, and you've put leaves on it, okay, you're not going to be able to change the colour of those branches. That's it. You're stuck with that colour. This is a tree actually I made a while ago. Before spraying the seafoam, I actually attached the seafoam to the main armature and gave the whole tree one colour. Now I could, if I wanted to, change the colour of those by giving it another spray paint. But for this particular video, I'm going to do it slightly differently. I'm going to be spraying the seafoam, then I'm going to be adding the leaves, then I'll be adding those seafoam branches to my main armature. So that's it. So let's get on and spray our seafoam branches.
The colour I'm using here is the Farrow & Ball French Grey number 18. And if you notice also, I'm holding those seafoam branches against the paper so that when I do give them a blast of paint, they don't bend and break.
When you have finished spraying, the next step is going to be adding leaves to your seafoam that you've sprayed. And the material I like to use is made by a company called Green Seam. They do a really nice range of materials for rowing modelers and wargamers alike. This is GS201, one shade of green. For this tree I'm using the same shade of green as this one, but with another shade added to it, and this is GS211. How do I add my leaves to my seafoam? Quite simply, I use the good old PVA glue. Not the same mixture I used when I coated these with PVA glue. I like to use a slightly stronger mix, so less water added to it. So these are the two I've got here. This is the one I used for coating my seafoam with. As you can see, it's quite runny. This one here, which I'm going to be using to add the leaves to the seafoam, is slightly thicker. As you can see here, I'm using one of those memo clip holders I used to hold the seafoam when I coated them with PVA glue. These are really handy for this type of job. So I've got my PVA glue here. This is the new mixture, slightly thicker than the first mixture I did. So what I'm going to do is, what you want to do is just dip the ends of your seafoam into the PVA glue. You don't want to dip the whole of your seafoam into the glue, just the ends now. Okay, because what you don't want is, you don't want leaves sticking to the bottom stems of your seafoam. Okay, just going to get rid of some of those blobs, give it a twirl. Okay, happy with that. So now I've added my green seam material into this Tupperware tub here. I'm just going to dab now the top of my seafoam onto the leaves. Okay, so the top is coated now with leaves. So what I'm going to do now is coat the underside with the leaves. So just bombard the underside with this leaf material. Don't worry about getting too much on, because the stuff that doesn't stick is just going to fall off. Give it a light tap. Happy with that. So when you've done your first one, continue doing the rest of them, just like the way I've done them here. Now that I've finished dressing all those seafoam branches of mine, the next job is to start adding them to my main armature here, this one here. Now I'm not going to be using glue for this job. I know a lot of railway modelers use a glue gel that comes with an activator. To me that sounds a bit sort of awkward and messy, because what you have to do is you have to hold your seafoam in one hand, attach a dab of glue to the end of one of the branches, hold your seafoam so the end is touching the glue, then spray that glue with a aerosol activator to make the glue go off straight away. That sounds a bit awkward and messy, so I'm not going to be using glue. I'm going to be using the good old heat shrink tubing that I got here, the same stuff I used in part 1. And the beauty about using heat shrink tubing for this job is actually you can start dressing your tree, trying out various sizes of seafoam before you actually commit to sticking your seafoam to your main armature. Now the way I'm going to heat shrink that tubing onto the end of my armature isn't by using a heat gun like I did in part 1, although I've got this small heat gun here I purchased recently, which would have been ideal for that job in part 1, and I thought I could use it for doing this job here. But I've come to the conclusion that if I use this, I run the risk of blowing some of those leaves off the seafoam, and also that seafoam ignites extremely easily, so I don't want to set fire to my seafoam while I'm trying to heat shrink the heat shrink tubing that's on my main armature. So what I'm going to be using is, and I've used in the past, is a soldering iron for the job. Now I've got two here. This is I think it's Antics 25 watt one. This is a variable control one. It can control the heat on that tip, and I'll probably end up using this for this job. As you can see, it's got a nice pointy tip to it. Now if you don't have a soldering iron, you can get you could use for example a 12 volt soldering iron. They're quite cheap. I think you can buy them on eBay for something like £7, so they would do the job. Or if you want to try, you could try using a hairdryer, for example. But again, you run the risk of maybe blowing some of those leaves off the seafoam when you're using a hairdryer. So for this job, I'm going to be using a soldering iron. Now you can see I've got all my seafoam branches now on the cutting mat. I've got a better view of them. I can see their shapes, the sizes, far easier than I could see when they were on that tray. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be working my way up from the bottom. Now before I commit any seafoam branches to my main armature, what I'll be doing is I'll be cutting the heat shrink tubing, putting them on the ends of these stems here, for example. I'll try one, insert it in the heat shrink tubing. If I'm happy with that particular seafoam branch, I'll then heat shrink the tubing. If not, I can always put another one in the heat shrink tubing. Try it out for size, for example. If I'm happy with that, then I'll heat shrink the tubing, and that will be on there permanently. Now for these wires, I'm probably going to be using this. I might need to use the slightly larger diameter one, depending on the size of the bottom of these some of these seafoam branches. So I'm going to start with this one here. So cut it to size. I've now cut my first piece of heat shrink tubing. I think this is inside diameter 0.6 or 1 mil. I know it's black, but don't worry about that colour, because once all the heat shrink tubing is on my main armature, they're going to get a coat of Artex, which will then be painted similar to the same colour it is as my main armature here. So I'm just going to insert that on that wire there. Okay, the next job then is to grab your seafoam, and as you can see, it's fairly tight fit there. Okay, so here's an example of the heat shrink tubing being too small there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that off and use a slightly larger diameter one for this job. So I've got my slightly larger diameter heat shrink tubing now on the end of that wire. I'm going to try this one out. Now that stem there is a bit too long, so I'm just going to trim that off. Okay, so and as you can see, I haven't heat shrunk the tubing yet, so it can come out very easily. I'll probably try another one in there just for size. I've now got two pieces of, as you can see, two pieces of heat shrink tubing out on the ends of these wires, and I've actually inserted four seafoam branches now, two in each one, just to pack it out a bit. I'm happy with that shape. Okay, I'm happy where they are. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to heat shrink that tubing out onto the wire with my soldering iron. I'm now going to take my soldering iron and using my handle to prop this up, I'm going to be now heat shrinking this heat shrink tubing onto the wire. Now I need to push that in because it was springing out. So what you need to do is just quickly touch the heat shrink tubing. Don't hold it out, soldering iron on the heat shrink tubing for too long. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now that I've finished attaching the seafoam to those two branches there, I'm going to be doing the same with these two branches here. Haven't decided yet how many seafoam branches I'm going to be attaching to them. I'll just have to play around, put some on, see how it looks, and when I'm happy with the look, I'll heat shrink the tubing onto those wires. Now I've put my I've cut my two lengths of heat shrink tubing, which you can see I put on the ends of these branch stems here. Now I think I'm going to want to add another piece of seafoam in that heat shrink tubing there. So what you can do is, if you need to create some smaller seafoam branches, you can just take one that you've finished and just snip off. You end up using this, just snip off a small branch like that. Easier said than done. See how strong this glue is, that this PVA glue is, when you attach it to the seafoam. Just going to try and probably end up going to break that now. Just see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to add that now, that small branch there, into the heat shrink tubing there. Okay, so I've done that now. That's heat shrink tubing's got two seafoam branches in it now. Now I'm going to try and, if possible, cover as much of this area as possible with another seafoam branch. So I'm just going to try a few of these to see which one is the best fit for this branch here. Okay, so I found one that sort of covers this area here, but what you can do is you can bend these wires if you think they need it to be in another position. So I'm just going to bend this wire down so this seafoam is a bit further down, covering this area here. I've now added 4 seafoam branches to those 2 wire frames there, and yep, that area now is more or less covered by the branches that I wanted to cover. So I'm going to go ahead now and heat shrink those 2 heat shrink tubes on the ends of those wires there. Now I've finished these 2 branches here. Before I add any more seafoam to my main armature, I'm going to disguise this heat shrink tubing now by adding some a layer of Artex to the tubing, which then will be painted similar to what I did in part 1 when I was making this armature. When it comes to mixing up your Artex paste for doing this job here, I've already disguised the heat shrink tubing here. I'm just going to have to wait now for that to dry before I paint it the same colour as the rest of the armature. These two pieces of heat shrink tubing here now need disguising. The mixture I'm going to be using for this job is similar to what we used in part 1 for making the armature. Artex, but instead of water I've added some PVA glue to it, and I've also added some Indian ink to it to give it a dark grey colour. So we're going to apply now some of this Artex to those two pieces of heat shrink tubing. Now you can see, don't have it too runny. Now I know I said I don't use my sable brushes when I'm using PVA glue, but I don't mind if this one gets ruined. But the reason why I like using this for this particular job is it's nice and springy on the end. You don't want too stiff a brush when you're doing this job, so that's why I'm using my sable brush. And providing I keep cleaning the hairs on it, I shouldn't ruin it. So we're just going to dab on. And also you can also paint some of the branches on the sea foam, so just to thicken them out at the bottom so that they don't look too lanky. Try not, when you do this, try not get any on the leaves if possible. I see these branches here, I'm just going to thicken them out slightly. And the reason I do this before I finish adding all the seafoam branches, it just makes it easier getting into those spaces there when you haven't got all the seafoam on your armature. Also, now you can wait a couple of minutes, then you can smooth that over now. You can then smooth that over with the brush with a bit of water on it. So the Artex I've applied to disguise the heat shrink tubing has dried now. So now, as you can see, the Artex did dry quite a dark grey colour. So that means I've added a bit too much black to it. But not to worry, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to be using the same colours I used for painting the main armature to paint over these over this Artex colour. I've already added some of that mixture here, as you can see, the colour is almost resembling the colour on the main armature. So got my palette here. I put in those colours, the green and the grey. I've also put a bit of isopropanol in on the tray. So I'm just going to, this is just a thin wash I'm putting on first of all. So you want to get paint on all that Artex you've applied to the heat shrink tubing, and also the Artex you've applied to the sea moss. Now, if you're lucky, sometimes when you mix up that Artex with the glue and ink, you'll get the same colour, almost the same colour as the main armature, which means there's not so much painting involved to get it looking like the main armature. But in this case, I added too much black, so I'm having to go over these small branches as well. And as you can see, look, see, it's now more or less matching it is matching the rest of the armature. So I'm going to crack on and get the rest of these done, and then I'll add some more sea foam to these branches here, do the same thing, add the Artex to disguise the heat shrink tubing. And when I get to the ends of these branches here with the growing ivy, I'm probably going to add some growing ivy also to the branches on the sea fern. So here's the tree, and I'm really happy with the results. All I've got to do now is add that small bird's nest I said I was going to be making to insert in the tree somewhere. Then I'll be putting the tree onto this mount here. Now, what I like to use for my bird's nest is something called rubberized horsehair. It's still available. Some Model Railway outlets still sell it for landscaping. Not used so much now in the upholstery industry. They use more modern methods. But it's ideal for this job. Also, it's brilliant stuff if you want to make, for example, make hedges for your landscape. So what you do is you take a small tuft from your horsehair. If you can't get horsehair, you could probably try other similar products that will probably do the same job. I just happen to have a load of this lying around, so I'm using this. So what you need to do is just need to cut it up into, you're not going to need an awful lot because you're making a very small bird's nest. So keep doing that until you've got some very fine pieces like I've got here. This is some I did earlier on. Okay, so you need to cut it down and get it to that size more or less. Now for making your bird's nest shape, you're going to need a piece of material to make your shape in for the bird's nest. I've got a piece of aluminium here. Again, a piece of material was lying around in my materials cupboard. I've drilled down into it by about 2 or 3 mil with, I think that's a 6 mil drill bit. If you don't have a piece of metal, piece of balsa wood would do the job, or a piece of wood. With the balsa wood, all you're going to do is take the end of your paintbrush, push it in quite firmly, and that's the shape of your bird's nest. The next job is to cover these holes with some sticky tape. Make sure it's shiny. This is parcel tape I'm using here. You could probably use sellotape, so you put that over the hole like that. I'll do the other one as well. Put it over the hole there like that. Then what you want to do is the smaller hole, just push down there like that with your paintbrush. Okay, so you got that like that. Same with this one, although don't want to end up breaking it, so just bring it up like that. Push it in like that. Slightly bigger hole this one. Okay, once you've done that, we'll put some PVA, neat PVA glue in those holes. Like that. Okay, sprinkle in your the rubberized horsehair you cut up. Press it down. Okay, the aluminium didn't work out as well as I'd hoped for this particular job here. Probably the best material to use is a piece of balsa wood like this here. It's easy to indent with the end of a paintbrush. So once you've allowed your PVA glue to dry, you can speed up the process by using a hairdryer on it. The next step is to peel off your tape from the balsa wood. There you go, one bird's nest ready to go on my tree. There you go, as easy as that.
And here's that bird nest I've just made that is now perched on my tree. You'll notice that I've inserted it slightly inside the canopy. That's why it's got a shadow on it, so you can't see an awful lot of detail on it. But when you do add a bird's nest to your tree, do make sure that it is inside the canopy slightly and not perched right on the edge of the canopy. So here we have it, the finished tree on that scenic mount I made for it, and to have a bit of fun I decided to shoot it in a more realistic setting like you see here. I hope you've enjoyed part 2, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'd love to hear from you and any tips from your tree modelling experiences that maybe I could incorporate in my next videos, or trees that you'd like to see modelled. Email me at modelingtrees@gmail.com or leave a comment, and don't forget to check out the links below.